beautiful. Yeah, I see everybody here, and that's visible too. And the audio is clear. Nothing's breaking down there. And the cosmos looks good. I know how to move things around. We're gonna have it looks like Maya, she'll be on the notes, right? You're gonna do notes, yeah. Well, when you've got a moment, no rush. I'm just checking now. But and then there's a bit of latency, of course, on YouTube, but we can see. There we go. So yeah, great. And on Toria, it's backwards, but then it comes back and it's
Yes.
right on. Good. So that will be Maya's spot. And so, yeah, great. Okay, so that's working. And let's see what else. And that will come back. So I can follow that. That's excellent. And oh, good. Mantha's there. I wasn't sure if she would be. So Mantha's going to be with us in the Cosmos. We have Carol here to assist. We have Maya on the notes. Okay. Well, I think I can say something that is pretty close to a miracle for this class. We are going to start right on time at 11:10 Eastern Time in the Rotary Global Classroom at Durham College in Oshawa, Canada. We now begin Short History of the World, class number 13, the penultimate class of the semester. Welcome everyone to this second last class of the semester. And it's good to see Malachi is here, Carol, Ryden, Maya, and Jack. And we may see others coming in person. And in the Cosmos, we see, of course, Mantha, Ebenezer, Etni, Marco, Roseanne. Oh, Samar is joining us too. Zohair as well. I'm glad that Samar can join us. I know that you've been struggling a little bit with some family issues, Samar, and it's great that you're able to join us. And you have been doing such good work in this class too with your assignments. So everyone can hear me and everyone can see us. And so I think that we can essentially begin, and we won't have to do any technical testing at all. Here we are, second last class of the semester. Well, the first thing we need to do is definitely get our scribe up at the smartboard. So Maya, could you please take your position? And Maya is heading over to the smartboard now, and we will just firm up the onboard list on the big board. Everybody can see the big board behind me too. We were working on that this week to get it functioning, and everybody's there for the moment. But you know what we'll do, Maya, is let's also do the Cosmos too, okay? So just put a C beside the names of those in the Cosmos who are on board, and that would be Mantha, Mantha, and just first names is fine because you won't have to. That's great. Ebenezer, Ebenezer. Nice. Etney, Etney. Marco. Way to go. I'll show everybody what she's doing. There you can see her as I give her the names, and you can make sure they're spelled correctly too, but she's doing a good job as always. Ruzan, Ruzan. And then Samar, Samar. Very good. And then finally, it looks like my Zohair, Zohair. There we go. So even this part today can work a little bit better because the camera's over with Maya. She's putting all your names there, and you can see that we have a nice crew, whether they're in person or whether they're in the Cosmos. Thanks, Maya. I'll bring the camera back here, and we are actually going to, at least at the beginning of the class right now, just remind us of this idea of a crew. You see behind me on the big board the crew of Artemis 2 that has returned to Earth. And last week's class, we talked about them because they were splashing down literally last week, if you can remember. And now they're back, and you can see behind me running right now is an interview that the four of them did with CBC News yesterday. And I'd like to keep that up there for now on the big board, as well as this stunning picture for the ages that you can also see of Earthrise. And that's the updated new picture of Earthrise that we now have from that mission. And if you recall, way back at the beginning of the semester, I showed you that original Earthrise image from the 1968 mission that was such a defining image of the 20th century. Well, now we have, over 50 years later, an updated image from behind the moon. And what you see there is the lunar landscape, the moon, and then just rising on the horizon is the Earth in the sunlight. And this image you may have seen circulating online. I hope you have, because this is turning out to be one of the defining images of this trip. And it was part of why they went, to go around the moon, but also get this updated, more vivid image of Earth rising in the distance. So I'm going to leave that there for now on the big board while we just do a little bit of reviewing. And then I have a lecture today that's going to bring us right up to date. I'm going to be covering today 700 years in the lecture from 1500 to 2200. So essentially, I'm going to be taking us from the end of the conquest, which was last week, if you remember, with that reading I did from Guns, Germs, and Steel, Collision at Cajamarca. And then I'm going to take us through the chapters Freedom's Power, Humanity's Stain, the 20th Century, and I'm going to be touching on the future as well into this century. So I'm going to try and end today at this date, more or less, of 2200, which is when you're going to be an older person, but you will still be alive by then. But we're going to touch a bit on the future. And I will get to that in a moment. But I have a bit of reviewing to do to make sure that everybody's ready. So first, let's get this. We may not need to write this date down, but is everybody fully aware that their third assignment is due next week? Does anybody need Maya to write this down in the notes? I don't think so. We're good with that, okay? Maya, you're good? Yeah, you're on top of things. So, and you know that if you get it in on the day before Thursday, you get that 10%. What we need to do, though, is finalize the presentation list for next week. Because if I recall, we had Malagai and Maya who are prepared to do presentations, right? So I just want to make sure we're ready for that and that everybody knows that their attendance for that class is extremely important. Whether you attend in the Cosmos or in person, particularly in person, I just want to say this again. For those of you attending in person in an audience, there will be bonus marks given to you. Not as great as the bonus marks given to the presenters. Malagai and Maya will be getting the bulk of those for the fact they're doing the presentation, but for being in the audience and being here to support them, that's really critical, okay? So I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that. And then we'll just finalize the list in a moment. So here's my question, okay, for all of you. Is there anybody here right now in the nucleus or in the cosmos that would like to do an in-class presentation next week here? Let's see. Anybody in the cosmos that would like to be here to do that? I'm just checking right now, okay? So I don't see anything from planet ZI, Zohair, Scott, Samar, Roseanne, Marco, Etni, Ebenezer, Carol, of course, Mantha, and the Cosmos. So I'm going to just say now, very clearly, nobody from the Cosmos today will be coming in and presenting in person next week. That's a decision. I'm making that executive decision now, okay? Great. So, could you write this then, please? First presenter next week. Who did we have last week? Was it Maya? Because the first presenter gets just that final little bonus. That is the toughest spot to be in, Maya, that you're taking next week. You're going to come here, and so let's make sure Maya is there, and then Malagai. Okay. I want to make sure that Maya and Malagai are clear on what to expect, whether they have any questions about their presentations. And I want you to all remember as well that for those of you coming in person next week, and there may be some joining from, the distant solar system, i.e. asynchronously, these cards will be handed out to all of you in person to write your comments down for each of the presenters, to give them feedback. So that's really important. But beyond that, I want to make sure that Maya and Malagai are clear. So before I do that, does anybody have any questions about next week's class? Maya, go ahead. Yeah, you can send it to me, okay? So I take it that you're going to be doing some sort of, is it a Prezi or PowerPoint? Great. So Maya's going to have, can you just put next to it PowerPoint, okay, PPT? She would be doing a PowerPoint. And Malagai, are you planning to do something like that? Okay, so are you going to have something for the big board behind you? Because it would help to have something, but I just want to make sure that now I'm going to help you with a bit of presentation techniques. I used to teach it, but even more than that, I worked for many years as an executive producer and producer in television, and I pitched many programs, so I understand how to pitch things in the real world. So I'm going to help with that in a moment, okay? But so while Malachi is looking for that, Maya, do you want to take a microphone just in case we need to go back and forth? And I want students to hear you too, but you can stay there, okay? And I'll keep the camera over here. Maya, can you just give a general idea at this point, or as best you can, what you're planning to present on?
Well, I think I said last week, but I'm planning on presenting about like the humanity's fascination with death and how like
Right. Yeah, good. So you haven't changed that. I remember. Excellent. So you had a good topic. Now, here's the important part, okay, in terms of how you present. So I'm assuming that what you're going to be doing is you're going to have a PowerPoint behind you, and you're going to stand here as we've done before, and you're going to present to the class. And I should be able to even give you this headset so you don't have to hold the microphone, okay? With that will probably help you, I think. Okay, how long are you planning to present for?
I'm aiming for 8 to 10 minutes.
Okay, that's what I asked for. Since there are only 2 presenters next week, I'm going to give you a little longer, which will help you. All right. So I'm going to give you between 12 to 15 minutes. Okay. Absolute max 15. So remember that you have a little more time. And after, I want you to be ready for some questions from everybody as well. Okay. Same with you, Malagai, in terms of the length of the presentation. And let me just stick with Malagai for a second. Sorry, with Maya for a second. I'll come back to Malagai, and then we'll finish up shortly. Here's one thing I want to make sure that you do, but this is difficult, okay? And I'm giving you a challenge on this. But I say this for all of you in terms of presenting. Please try to minimize the amount of time that you're reading from your PowerPoint slides, and try to maximize the amount of time you're talking to people, which means that you need to prepare in advance a little bit so that when you switch a slide, you kind of know you've rehearsed, so you know in your memory more or less when to switch. But once you've switched, the worst thing you can do from a presentation standpoint, and you probably have experienced this in other classes with bad presentations, is a person will stand and read bullet point by bullet point, and they're not looking at anybody, and it really looks boring and flat. However, I understand why people do that because they're nervous and they want to make sure they get everything. So, how do we prevent that, Maya? How are we going to prevent that from happening so that you can give a good interactive presentation while still this? What would be your suggestion?
I use a script usually.
Okay. So that will help you. And it's okay if you just read completely from the script the whole time. Try the best you can to rehearse beforehand so that you're able to, from memory as much as possible, speak so that you can have eye contact with people. And here's one piece of advice for you, really critical, and then I'll go to Malagai. It has been said by some who teach presentation techniques, you may have heard this, that when you present to people, particularly large crowd, you look over them. Never. My experience from a professional standpoint, having made many presentations, is I present the way I teach, which is I look at people, you're engaging them. But that takes confidence and experience. But you can do that by rehearsing. So the more you rehearse, the more you have it in your head, it's easier for you then to engage with people because it's in your head. But if you can't do that, Maya, it's okay. All right? But I just want to help you with that. So 12 to 15 minutes. And I think somebody, Mantha, I think I see you unmuted. Is there something you want to say?
I just noticed that Carol put in the Cosmos that she was presenting as well.
Yes. Okay. Carol is going to present at the end as well. Okay. And I wanted to just mention to you something about this because I do this in other classes as well. Carol is a volunteer who comes in, is a former student, and she's been an outstanding student. She is so engaged and motivated, but she's not registered like all of you. So if you've noticed through the class this semester, she comes and she's been helping, and she's a great help, but I don't always bring her in because I want to make sure all of you are taken care of. However, I have said to other students, like Carol and there are others in other classes I teach, who come to the classes, but they're not registered. And I always encourage that because they elevate the class. Carol has asked, as others have in other classes, if they could do a brief presentation because they love the topic so much. And I've said yes. So I would hope that you don't have to. I don't want to put any pressure on anybody to be here for her presentation, but I think you want to because she actually has quite a lot to say. And she not only, she has a personal story, as you know, from Peru, in terms of her history and understanding of world history. So it will be very interesting. But Carol, I just want you to know that I have to tell the students that I can't expect them to be here if you're not registered, okay? You understand? Carol? Yeah, okay. But it's great when a student wants to give a presentation, and I want to encourage that. Okay, does everybody understand that? All right, good. Okay, so there will be 3 presentations. And Carol, is there anything we should put on the board yet in terms of topic that you're thinking of? You don't have to. It's a conflict? Okay. Just put conflict, a conflict, okay? A conflict. We don't know yet what it's going to be, but a conflict. Okay, good. Okay, well, we'll see, okay? Mantha, thank you for pointing that out. So, Malagai, in terms of your presentation, is there anything else that you'd like to ask, or do you feel you understand from how I explained it already? Absolutely. I love that. That's great. Go. Malagai just asked if there's any time during the presentation where he can ask the audience a question. I absolutely encourage that.
Yeah, because I'm doing mine is about, hold on, what's the title? It's Creation Myths, Two
Yes.
Ways of Understanding the Same Beginning.
Yeah, yeah.
So my main question is to the audience is, what do you believe?
What do you believe? Nice.
And that's
And are you going to be leaving some time in the 12 to 15 minutes? Even after you're finished, if you go 15 minutes, you can still spend 5 minutes for questions. So it'd be nice to hear even during the presentation or after how they answer. Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
So that's good, but you don't have to. You'll see. Okay. But I love when a presenter will engage the audience that way. Okay. Anything else you feel you understand? If you want to send me anything in terms of a Prezi or a PowerPoint or something that you're going to put behind you that helps us with images, you can send that to me. Email that to me in advance.
Okay.
And
do that.
I'll get things set up for you at the podium.
Okay.
Great. Okay. Etni, I see in the live chat there's a question. Can we still come in to support Etni? It's a great, absolutely. That's what I hoped. Maybe you didn't hear me just a few minutes ago, but if you come in, Etni, to support in person, you get bonus participation marks. So I'm very much encouraging this. And Etni, if you can even bring a friend or two if you want, or bring your dog or cat, as long as they don't get in the way. But the more people we can get in person, Etni, for Maya and Malagai, the better it is for them. So does that answer your question, Etni? Excellent. All right. So that is my little presentation section. We can move on, but we'll be ready next week for this. And so while we're at the board with Maya, I would like to just do a little review, but largely feedback. So I just want to give you some general feedback for all of you as you're moving towards your third assignment, which is worth 30%. I have a question for all of you, including in the Cosmos right now. Is anybody having some difficulty with this assignment right now? Or does anybody have a question they'd like to bring to the class's attention? Let's see. Zohair, great. No, Roseanne. Well, Roseanne, you have been doing some excellent work this semester too, and great contributions. I'm expecting to see a very good third assignment. Can you jump on your microphone? Are you able to?
Hello.
Great. Okay. Roseanne, do you know what you're going to do your third assignment on?
Yeah, so my topic is on like technology. Will technology like take over the world? So I'm basically doing on it because of AI and stuff.
Yes. Yes. Good. Okay. And then just curious, as you look at AI and technology and its role in our lives, which I cannot encourage you enough to take on, how will you incorporate the course material into your essay? Kind of curious. Can you explain that a little bit?
So for example, like as we see on like civilizations, we see as the world progressed, we saw like the technology, we saw humans having technological advances, but it didn't meant like technology completely took over us. Yeah, it made life easy or had like kind of dominancy on like how we consider how we carry out our affairs. But so it's basically like I just intertwine both of
Sure.
these things. Like even
Yep.
though like AI or other stuff may come, but I don't think it's gonna completely take over. So it's basically that.
And I'm just going to ask you a little bit of a difficult question, but I think you'll probably know the answer. Based on the lectures and the classes that we've had this semester, what is the earliest piece of technology that humans created?
Writing system or wheel?
Keep going back further.
Agriculture?
Good. Keep going back further. Do you remember when I showed you, I may not have shown you this semester, I normally do, but when I talked about a rock and shaping a rock, did I ever show you that in this semester?
The Greek wood?
Okay. Because normally what I will do, let me just see if it's still here. hold on a second, but if not, I usually will. I will take a rock from the podium, and I will hold it up in my hand. So just imagine a rock like this, and I will show that this rock with an image behind me of the first weapon in human history, a 3 million year old rock that has a human hand's indentation into the rock, shaping it with a little point on it. And what we did, we humans, is with our precision grip, when we developed thumbs, an opposable thumb that eventually added to the 4 digits that our primate ancestors have, we developed an opposable thumb that allowed us to get what's called a precision grip on things. And once we did that, we could take a rock and we could begin to shape a rock by chipping away at it into a weapon or a tool. And we often say that that rock, that 3 million year old rock, is the first human tool. So it would be pretty cool if in the course of your presentation that you send, you make reference to the fact that humans have been developing tools to give them more power, going all the way back to the first rocks that they shaped into tools. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks, sir.
Yeah, good. Okay. I apologize if I didn't lecture on that this semester. There's a lot I haven't done, but I will make sure when I can to give you that important stuff. Great. Okay. So, Roseanne, nice topic. And I think everybody else is pretty good in terms of their assignments. Jack, is there anything you want to say about your third assignment? You feeling pretty good about it? Yeah. You always do good work in this course when you're handing in stuff. I've liked it. Okay. So I'm looking forward to it. Do you know what you're going to do more or less at this point? You still think about it? Okay. All right, then that is some feedback for you. Maya, could you just write down for critical feedback, integration of course material. It's a really important part of the marking scheme. If you want to be taking on something about our future, when it comes to artificial intelligence, like Roseanne is doing, that's great. But you're not writing about the future in this class. You're writing about history, and you're bringing examples from history to answer a question you may have that may speak to the future, but make sure we see lots of history in it, okay, from the class. That's really important. Okay, I think I'm ready to deliver the main content for you today, and then we will be able to wrap things up, maybe even a little bit early, but so far so good. Let me do this again just to see for my own self, because I like to play around. It's all working. There's Maya on the smartboard. I just want to take a moment to breathe a sigh of relief that I'm not scrambling around with tech issues today. The audio is working, microphones are working, the smartboard's working, which means all the work I put into it this morning is helping. All right. We have some catching up to do. And so let me first just speak to what you're seeing on the big board behind you. I wanted to begin this lecture today more or less where we left off last week, but I'd like to go back to the beginning of last week in terms of the space part, and then I'm going to jump ahead to after the conquest, and I'm going to continue on, and I'll bring up some new images. But I want to remind all of you again how fortunate we are to be living at this time in history when so many technological advancements are being made that have allowed us now to go back into space in a much more concentrated way and to begin building in the next 2 to 3 years our first colony, human colony on the moon. That's what is going to unfold in the next 2 to 3 years. This mission that happened recently and that you're seeing behind me in terms of the interviews with the 4 individuals was just a way to prepare the next Artemis mission that will launch in a year, and then the next one after that, to actually land on the moon and build the first base of human colonization in which humans will live on the moon for a short period of time, or maybe an extended period of time. And this is a remarkable technological achievement. But at the same time, we're living at a time also in which technology is not only expanding our frontiers and our minds in such powerful ways, it's also creating great challenges for all of us too. Because as you know, we are living now at a time where artificial intelligence is racing ahead and beginning to replace, in many ways, what we do on the job, in school, and other things. So I want to introduce you to an idea that you're going to hear me talking a lot about today. And I'm going to go backwards in a moment. I'm just setting things up. I'm going to bring back that wonderful giant of human history I've spoken about before, William McNeill, who wrote the book Rise of the West, History of the Human Community, that I showed you early on in the course. And he talked about the paradox of progress. Could you please write that down? The paradox of progress. I want you to think about that for a moment as I just go here. I'm going to do a little bit of a switch here to bring up the beginning of our main content today, and that is here. Okay? And I'm going to leave that behind, and I'm going to leave this behind. And I stay with this for the moment. I'm going to be showing you 2 videos today, fairly soon. They're going to be coming in the course of my lecture. One of them is a very powerful video about the Second World War, and it's called the Wannsee Conference. Could you please write that down? The Wannsee Conference. It's 2 N's and 2 S's and 2 E's. Wannsee Conference. The Wannsee Conference. Might be 1 S, but I'll have to check it again, okay? At any rate, when we talk about the paradox of progress, we're going to see this play out in the 20th century. And I'm going to be building to that today as well. You're going to be seeing in the Wannsee Conference, when I show it to you, a moment during the Second World War that has been well documented, is absolutely authentic, and it is a moment when a country that was winning the war, the Second World War, in 1942, a great civilization of human beings determined that they wanted to liquidate and kill an entire culture of people, wipe them out. And what you're going to see in that docudrama, based on absolutely true information that I can tell you all about, I just want you to get ready for this, is you're going to see a moment in history when a war was taking place, the greatest conflict in human history, the Second World War, in which a country that was winning the war at that moment decided that they would come together and have a meeting and make a plan on how do you kill as many people as possible. Quickly, quietly, without the world knowing what you were doing. How do you keep that a secret? In other words, we're going to see the worst of humanity: depravity, savagery, cruelty, the absolute worst, which is when human beings decide that they're going to use the most powerful weapons at their disposal to come together and make a plan on how you commit mass murder on a global scale. That happened in the Second World War, and worse. The Second World War was in some ways the worst of humanity in what happened, because we saw genocide and omnicide emerge in the story of us. And I'd like Maya to write this down. I'm going to go backwards in a moment. Far worse than what you saw with the conquest last week. Genocide is to some extent what you saw last week when the Eastern Hemisphere came over, led by the Europeans, and essentially destroyed the First Nations here, and did that kind of willingly, but not with such a well-executed plan. In the case of the Second World War, we're going to see a plan laid out. It's called the Wannsee Conference. It took place in Berlin in 1942 when the Nazi High Command met and decided, here's how we can actually carry out what's called the final solution. The war ended with a nuclear bomb being dropped. The atomic bomb was developed that can kill all life on the planet. That's called omnicide. And I want Maya to write this down. OMNICIDE. Why am I telling you these two things now and jumping ahead? Because I want you to understand this idea of the paradox of progress. Progress means that you begin to develop more powerful ways of managing your life that can be for the betterment of humankind. But progress can also mean that you create new dangers and new responsibilities, because in the process of developing these new powerful tools, you can use these tools for destructive purposes. And so what I'm going to try and help you to understand is, in the paradox of progress that developed, there was this darker side that humanity was able to even develop more because of its technologies. But yet, William McNeill has tried to show us, and I will show you today, in spite of that, there is something very good happening in the human story. And I'm going to show you some information about that. So I want you to be ready to hold in your mind these two competing ideas, the light and the dark, that the more you get that is helping, you can also be creating new responsibilities for yourselves. Does everybody feel fairly clear on that idea of what the paradox of progress can mean? Jack, does it make sense? It's like a contradiction. The more powerful you get, the more responsibility you have to use the things that have given you power for our betterment. But if you don't use them for our betterment, you can end up destroying even more now with powerful new tools. So let's go back, and then I'm going to build towards this video that I want to show you. And that is, let's take a look at the world map for a moment, okay? Because this map has been so central in our story this semester. And let's just remind ourselves of where we've come from. In the conquest, what we looked at, and I'll just do a little bit of stick handle here. I think I can do it. There we go. In the conquest, we saw that right here in the North Atlantic, we had this remarkable trip that Christopher Columbus took all the way across the Atlantic Ocean and then landed around the Bahamas. And we saw what unfolded at that point, which is that he and others who came after him began to establish their culture in the Americas at the cost of the First Nations and Aboriginal peoples who were here. That destruction and that replacement of the indigenous cultures here with European cultures was not planned to the extent that it unfolded. It was encouraged, but it wasn't executed according to a final solution plan, which is what you're going to see happen in the Second World War. But something good happened after that event. Something that gives us hope and is going to be there in the human story again and again. And that is, after the conquest, there actually was a religious figure in the Americas. His name was Bartolome Las Casas. His father actually had personal relationship with Christopher Columbus. Bartolome Las Casas. He was a comfortable, clerical figure, not an archbishop, but a priest in the Americas who had a plantation. And he was using the indigenous peoples as slaves for his plantation. But he had a crisis of faith. He had a crisis of conscience. And this is the chapter that I want to just quickly go over right now as I cover a kind of a 700-year period from the 1500s, which is when the European explorers came over, as we now move towards the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s, taking us up to the 20th century. And I'm going to go through freedom's power, humanity's stain, and a little bit of the 20th century. But what happened is, after the conquest, there was an individual who emerged in our story who believed that what we had done in the way that we had treated the indigenous peoples was wrong. And this was a powerful person, Bartolome Las Casas. And he came out of the very same religion, the Christian religion, that had condoned and had encouraged Columbus and the other explorers to treat the indigenous peoples like savages, like subhumans. Remember that edict, that papal bull that I had mentioned to you that had accompanied Christopher Columbus? In this case, Bartolome Las Casas said, we must stop this. We cannot be treating the people of this part of the world this way. And essentially what he did, which is remarkable, is he began a campaign. He began to write about the abuses that the Europeans were carrying out towards the First Nations peoples, the millions and millions who'd either been slaughtered, who died through their exposure to infectious diseases. And essentially what he was beginning to introduce to our story through his religion is that no human being is superior to any other human being. And listen to what he accomplished. In 1550, a conference was held in Spain, in Valladolid, Spain, the very country that had sent the conquistadors like Francisco Pizarro and the others that you saw who had encountered the Peruvian Andean people in that part of South America. Remember when I read that chapter last week, Collision at Cajamarca, of our encounter with the Inca population and how that ended with the friar bringing a cross up to Atahualpa, the Inca. Do you remember that from last week? Bartolome Las Casas was saying, this is wrong. We can't do that. We can't be trying to convert people here. They've been here longer than we have. We must respect them as human beings. He said, I have a religious crisis of conscience. Jesus would never allow that kind of exploitation and cruelty to take place against another human being. And in 1550, this is the remarkable thing that he did. The Spanish king at the time, a new king, held a conference in Spain. And he asked Bartolome Las Casas to bring together his writings and his eyewitness accounts of all that he had witnessed of the abuses in the Americas. And he asked him to sit down and read from his book. And next to him, he asked a figure who had become just as influential, but with the opposite view. And his name was Miguel de la Sepulveda. If you can't get these names down, Maya, it's okay, as long as you understand this idea. Miguel de la Sepulveda was the one who was writing, these people in the Americas should be kept as savages and children their whole lives. We should be teaching them about civilization, and we should not be providing them with respect and equality, because it's clear to everybody that these people are subhuman. They don't even have writing. They don't even wear many clothes. And even though they have sophisticated cities, they don't have the guns that we have and the great ideas that we have. And they don't have Christianity. So we must go on. And we must continue to exploit them and ensure that they do what we demand of them. And the king asked for the two of them to debate. Listen to this. What is a human being? What is a human? Does any human, even a human who says they have the superior culture and the superior religion, can any human use that as a reason to dominate another human if we are all humans? Is it true that the Aboriginal people of this part of the world are just as human as we are? And there was a debate for 8 days in a church, a castle in Valladolid, a debate that's never happened again like this, debating whether we should allow this kind of abuse to take place and whether we should declare that all humans are equal. Do you know what the result of this debate was? Not what you think. It ended with the king saying only one new thing would take place in the way that the Spanish interacted with the indigenous peoples, and that was there will be no such thing anymore as slavery through inheritance or inherited slavery. In other words, what he said was a person who's born into slavery no longer is automatically considered to be a slave too. Just because you were born into this system we have does not mean that you have to carry on that system and be a slave. In other words, slavery can end. Slavery can end. A person who's born into a family that is perceived to be of a lower order in life should not be inheriting that very same identity. Let me give you an example of this. I've seen this play out in Oshawa, even to this day. In Lower Oshawa, or parts of Oshawa, there are places called crack houses. Places where there are people who, are there because they're drug addicts, they're junkies, and they're people who have perhaps been taking drugs for a long time and they've decided that they cannot recover from that and they will continue to take those drugs. And they have children. A child who grows up in a world of humiliation and abuse could come to believe that that child has no choice but to become like their parents. Imagine, for example, if your parents, and I've seen this among my students, are alcoholics. Imagine if your parents are people that have been struggling and have not been able to break out of that, but you as the child, you want to break out of that. You know you can do more, but yet you come to believe that you don't have a chance, that the world is against you, and you become just like the worst of your parents or the worst of that world. You believe you're destined to live in that. What a terrible burden to carry in your life, to think that you will never have a chance to be better. Well, the king was saying at that point in history, I'm willing to accept that the children of the slaves can become something else, not slaves. That's all he was saying. But that was an important step for humanity. And essentially, what we saw over the 1600s and 1700s, going into the 1800s, is we began to see a new way of thinking about ourselves. The idea that equality and freedom is possible for all humans was not just introduced by Bartolome Las Casas, but in Europe, in places like Italy and places like England and the Western world, we began to see a new movement developing there, driven by new inventions that were developing too. The printing press that had allowed Christopher Columbus to read about the travels of Marco Polo was also publishing many new books with many new ideas that people were reading. And in a very, very kind of short form, what we saw after the conquest was the emergence of the idea of human freedom and a return to the ideas of ancient Greece. It's called the Renaissance. It's a rebirth. It was humanity looking back and deciding that there is more, there is better that we can do as human beings, that there is this need for all humans to be living in more freedom and greater respect. And we saw freedom's power emerging even more than it ever has in the human story. And this is a remarkable thing, because what it tells us is that Alfred North Whitehead was right. Alfred North Whitehead was the world historian that I told you about very early on, who wrote about the world it dreams of things to come, and then in due season arouses itself to their realization. Alfred North Whitehead was the historian who said that there have been flashes of free thought, flashes of freedom through our story, but eventually the dream that humans have for greater freedom for themselves, the dream that humans have to be respected as individuals, is so powerful in the human story that it will eventually have its season. And the season for this was after the conquest, through the 1600s and 1700s and 1800s, we saw the emergence of human rights. The beginning of human rights emerge, driven by the fact that we had a piece of technology that allowed people to be reading about these new ideas. So literacy began to grow through the printed press. The philosophers that were developing these new ideas of freedom from France, for example, and Italy, what we call the Renaissance, led to a period of what we call the Enlightenment. That the more education we had around human rights, the more freedom, the more we began to turn to science and free thought as a way of understanding the world. This is all good for humanity. This is all progress. This is the one side of that double-edged sword of the paradox of progress that we can celebrate, is that there is this slow sunrise, and Alfred North Whitehead said, towards civilization in the human story. There is this slow sunrise towards humanity wanting to improve the lives of us all. And there is this awakening. It has been slow. The awakening led by our understanding that human equality and human dignity are among the greatest forces in the human story. But, a big but. You might ask, what is humanity's stain? Well, in this story of our progress, as we move towards the 20th century, where we're going to see these forces play out in such accelerated but also destructive ways, I have some bad news. In spite of these breakthroughs towards greater freedom that began to emerge after the conquest, we still had not dealt with the one critical force that had been driving so many civilizations. Even though we understood that freedom was more important, even though there were figures like Bartolomé Las Casas and the philosophers of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment who were helping us to understand these new ideas of freedom, we had not yet dismantled slavery itself. Humanity's stain is my term for slavery, institutionalized slavery, as in a system of accepted and encouraged industrialized exploitation of human beings for economic profit. In the 1700s and the 1800s, there was a nation that grew immensely and became the first great global superpower, and that is England. And England did it in large part because of slavery. But England is also going to recognize through the Bartolomé Las Casas figures, not Bartolomé Las Casas himself, but there will be figures who emerge in England who will lead a movement called the abolition movement of slavery that will end it. But I would like to tell you how widespread institutionalized slavery was at this moment in history. England, if you look at the world map and you just go up a little bit, right up here, and I'll bring it into the center. Okay, the United Kingdom. Look at how tiny that island is compared to the rest of the world. The United Kingdom is actually more than just England. It's united England with Wales, Scotland on that island, and Ireland or parts of Ireland. But you may ask, how is it that England, this tiny place in the world compared to like China, for example, or India, these great civilizations in human history, how would England become such a powerful country and create this global power, so much so that it would be said that the sun will never set on the English Empire? Wherever you are in the world, England will have colonies eventually all over the world. So it would be said the sun never sets on the English Empire, because in some part of the world where there is an English colony, the sun is rising or the sun is going down. England became the power it did because it broke the monarchy. It did what Rome did. Although Rome went back to the dictatorship, England had developed many new ideas around freedom. and innovation and support for free thought. And England had also created a new way of governing ourselves called a parliament and a sort of democracy, still very much based on the monarchy. England had executed in 1648 its king, King Charles. England was the first country that began to incorporate ideas of freedom into its governing structure that it would then develop industry around and new kinds of ideas that would be spread across the world. But England also did what every other empire has done in history. When you go all the way back, even to the ancient Sumerians, the ancient Egyptians, the great Islamic empires, the beginnings of Europe with Charlemagne as he created European Christianity, the Roman Empire, the Greeks, the empires of the Americas, the empires of Africa, they all did this. They had institutionalized slavery. Do you know how the transatlantic slave trade worked that gave England all the things that it needed to grow? It worked something like this. Take the triangle. Here is England. Here is England that has the strongest navy and the largest ships at that time, and had created a system whereby there were slave owners who would sail down to the coast of Africa. This is the part of the triangle here. I'll just draw it a little bit because the edge of the triangle is going to go, if you can see it, the point of the triangle will be in the Americas, and the bottom of the triangle will be one part, the base of the triangle will be Western Africa. It will go up to England, and then we will go back to the tip in the Americas. It's the triangular slave trade. And the idea was that the slave owner from England would come down to Africa, to the west coast of Africa. And the slave owner would have guns and would have whiskey and would have other things that they would bribe. They would give to the African chiefs at the time. In Africa, these weapons, this liquor, and other things for the African chiefs, not all of them, but many, to bring to the coast. All the young black men that they could, shackle them, walk them from the middle of the Congo, for example, all the way to the west coast, because these chiefs would get their guns and they would get their alcohol, and it would allow them to stay in power. And then all of these men, millions of them, would be put onto ships and would be brought all the way over to the Americas, where they would be hired by plantation owners, often not hired. They would be enslaved for life to work the tobacco plantations, the sugar plantations, the cocoa plantations, and other resources. And all those resources would then go back to the United Kingdom, where the British would have their sugar, they would have their ivory for their billiard balls, they would have rubber from the rubber trees in Africa so they could build their tires, their rubber tires. This empire was using slavery as a way to create the products for its own people. And eventually that system of institutionalized slavery, what I call humanity's stain, will be broken by the abolitionist movement of people like Bartolome Las Casas, who again will confront this exploitation and this cruelty. And institutionalized slavery in the mid-1800s will be declared a criminal business. This is good for humanity when these things happen. When we come into the 20th century, I want to get you ready for the last part of today's talk. We enter a period in history where it seemed like we had overcome some of our biggest problems. We had abolished institutionalized slavery. A new nation had formed in the world called the United States of America, in which there was a constitution for the first time in history, along with the French, both around the same time had declared that they would have governing systems that were democratic, in which the people would vote, the people would elect their representatives, and the people would be the governing power, a government for the people and by the people. This is what the American Constitution had said. It seemed like after the American Civil War had taken place in the 1800s, that had also been fought over slavery and that had been won by the part of the United States that had opposed slavery. We now come into the 20th century, the 1900s, the most dramatic, turbulent, and remarkable time in human history. And I want to set the stakes for you again. Once again, we are faced with the conflict. It seems like we always will be, to some extent, in human civilization. The more we advance, the more danger there is. I want you to think about this for a moment. Some of you may think that with progress and advancement comes more peace, something better. Yes, but the paradox of progress. So let me just set the stakes for you about the 20th century in the simplest way I can. It is often said that the 20th century, just this 100-year period, is the most important century in our story. These 100 years. In 1900, the population of human civilization on planet Earth was around 2.5 billion. In 100 years, the population of the planet is going to go from 2.5 billion to about 8 billion. There's going to be an exponential growth in human beings who are alive on Earth. Why? Well, because in this period of greater freedom, greater human rights, and more human invention, we humans started to do something that we should be proud of. We extended the human life. In most of human societies, through human history, unless you were very wealthy, you lived to about a 30, maybe 35. But because human invention and medical science had developed, hygiene, we were keeping our cities and our communities cleaner. We were developing things like vaccines and medicines that allowed us to treat illnesses so that we wouldn't die so young. And so essentially what was happening is that as we came into the 20th century, we were seeing more people staying alive and fewer people dying. Mortality was going down and life expectancy was going up. This is important. We were also seeing that science was now accelerating in its development. Let me just give you a very quick definition of what science is. Science is understanding what is in nature, what is really in nature. Let me tell you how that works. Your computer, your phone, that electricity, this microphone, electronics, modern electronics. Do you know where that comes from? It's a force of nature. It's called electricity. We discovered that, how electricity works. But then at the beginning of the 20th century, the person who won the Nobel Prize for Science, among the many who are now going to emerge in our story, like Albert Einstein, for example, but there will be many more, a person saw the electron. What is the electron, you may ask? Well, science had been developing through this period of greater and greater freedom because people were peering more into the natural world and developing tools to see things more clearly. They were moving away from religion to understand what is really in the world. And they were trying to see for themselves, just the way Aristotle and Plato and Socrates had done. And we knew in the 1900s, at the very beginning, that there's a thing called the human atom. There's a proton and a neutron, and it's called the nucleus. That's why I call you the nucleus. You're the protons and neutrons. But then we saw, at the beginning of the 20th century, with a new type of microscope, there's this thing flying around, and it's leaving its tail in the atom. But we can't see it. It goes so fast. That must be what is giving electricity its force in nature. That is the electron. And so what we did is we began to take the electron out of nature and we began to develop tools. The electron is eventually going to be captured in what we call the transistor. Transistors are going to be captured and then spread out over silicon chips. And that will become the chip that becomes the basis of digital technology. The reason why information moves so fast in your phone and in our modern electronics is because we figured out how to put the electron into a machine and make it work for us. That's called science, and that's called technology. Does that make sense? Well, this is what was beginning to happen in the 20th century, in the early part, is we were beginning to see more in nature, and we developed now airplanes. We developed new kinds of weapons, the tank. We developed a submachine gun that could allow us to kill faster. We began to create automobiles. We started to create modern communications like motion picture and radio and television. All of these things are coming out of science and technology. And all this is good, except the Greeks understood this. If we go back to ancient Greece, they had a titan, and his name was Prometheus. Have any of you ever heard of Prometheus? The name Prometheus, a Greek titan. Has anybody in the cosmos ever heard this name? I would just say very briefly, the story of Prometheus is the story of a half-human, half-god-like figure who learns how to steal fire from Zeus, the main god. Prometheus recognized that if he can give fire to humans, he can give them great power. But if he does that, he will be eternally punished. It's called the Promethean dilemma. It's said, as William McNeill said to us about the idea of the paradox of progress, the more power you give to humans that is in nature, if that power is not used well, humans are going to suffer for that. It's called the Promethean dilemma. Well, we did greatly in the world wars. We had a world war that unfolded in 1914 to 1918, which was the first mechanized war in human history, in which we had submachine guns, airplanes, bombs, and many other new types of technologies that ended up killing more people in more places more quickly than ever. We thought we had peace after this First World War. The world fell back into another war, the Second World War, and now it was even worse. I'm going to show you a clip from a docudrama, to help you understand that even with new technology and new science that seems to improve our lives, if we're not smarter, if we're not spiritually and morally more grown up, if we don't grow emotionally and spiritually and morally at the same time as we grow our machines, we have a huge problem in civilization. Let me show you this. I'm just going to bring this up for you. And I'll start in a moment. You're about to see something that is going to help you to understand something about history. And then I'm going to show you something else, and then we're going to finish. This is the bad part of the double-edged sword. Just start this, and then I'll stop it because I want to explain this for everybody. Here we are. For those of you in the cosmos, could you please go to YouTube, and I will write this here. Go to YouTube and enter 1C conference German with subtitles. Okay? I'd like you to watch this, and I'm going to also give you a time code to go to in a minute. Watch the first 2 minutes, then go to 2030 and watch from there, okay? Did everybody get that in the live chat? Want to make sure you watch this. And before you start, please just listen to my introduction. In 1939, Germany, which is one of our great civilizations in human history, led by Adolf Hitler and his ideology of supreme superiority of the German race. It's called the Aryan race, the Aryan people, blonde, blue-eyed German people. He believed, for many reasons, but largely one reason, that Germany was destined to be the dominant culture of the world. And he invaded one European country after another with very powerful armed forces. In 1942, 3 years into the war, Germany occupied many European nations. And it did seem like they just might win the Second World War. At this point, Adolf Hitler, the Führer, the supreme commander of the Nazi movement that had come to power, and they were elected. Let me just be clear about this. They came to power elected in 1932 or 1933. These kinds of individuals do get their support from the people. So if you wonder how is it possible for a person of such hate and determination and cruelty and almost madness to come to power, please don't think of it as it's because he was a crazy person. Think of it as the people asked for that. They voted for that. They wanted that until they realized what they had voted for. In 1942, he tasked for 60 minutes his senior figures to come together in a conference in Berlin, just north of Berlin, called a place called Wannsee. I don't believe any of you know this story because none of you have been taught this properly. This is how the Holocaust was planned. What is a Holocaust? A Holocaust is, from a Jewish perspective, it's the moment in history when the extermination of the Jewish people was planned and almost carried out. But it's bigger than that. It's called genocide. If you believe that something like the Holocaust or genocide is just a conspiracy theory, I have news for you. Humanity is capable of some awful things. Very intelligent people are capable of some very awful things for the sake of their ideology. Watch how, in this German documentary, docudrama with dramatic scenes based on the records that the Germans left behind afterwards, we know for a fact from the records that were left that Hitler had planned to kill probably 15 million people in Europe. Every opponent of him were to be either deported or killed or liquidated. But the remarkable thing about this moment in history is we're going to see now educated, civilized people coming around a boardroom table, almost like the executives of Ford Motor Company or General Motors in Oshawa, coming around a table to figure out how are they going to build cars. Except this is, how do you kill people on an industrial scale? Here it is. Sorry. Let me just get rid of, there's another audio going here, sorry. Let me come back to this. And let's just watch the first 2 minutes and then I'm going to take you ahead. Here it is, 1942, just outside Berlin, Germany's winning the war. The senior command has been asked by Hitler to come together and figure out the final solution.
On Tuesday, January 20th, 1942, at a house in the quiet Berlin suburb, Wannsee, a meeting was held. At the invitation of Reinhard Heydrich, head of the security police and secret service, 14 key representatives of the Nazi Party, of the SS, and of the government bureaucracy attended. The meeting lasted just 90 minutes. There was only one item on the agenda.
I'm going to jump ahead to the conference itself. They're all meeting, they have their coffees, their pastries, you hear dogs barking, and it's all very nice and civilized. Let's go ahead. And then finally, begin to have a discussion. What are we going to do with all these Jews? Here we go. Shut the dog up.
Einen besonderen Grund, Herr Reichsprotektor, einen besonderen Grund, warum Sie erst heute nach einem halben Jahr von diesem Bestallungsschreiben vom Juli des Vorjahres gebraucht haben. Ja, 3 Gründe. Die erwähnten Vorbereitungen gestalteten sich außerordentlich umfangreich und kompliziert und meine zusätzlichen Aufgaben als stellvertretender Reichsprotektor von Böhmen und Mähren fielen zeitlich alle zusammen. Auch ein früher Besprechungstermin wurde verschoben wegen des Eintritts der USA in den Krieg und der sich daraus ergebenden vorrangigen Anforderungen auch an meine Zustände. Ich frage deshalb, weil in Ihrem Einladungsschreiben heißt es, in Anbetracht der außerordentlichen Bedeutung, die diesen Fragen zuzumessen ist und im Interesse der Erreichung einer gleichen Auffassung bei den in Betracht kommenden Zentralinstanzen, rege ich an, zwecks Parallelisierung der Linienführung, diese Probleme zum Gegenstand einer gemeinsamen Aussprache zu machen. Und darauf will ich hinaus. Zumal seit dem 15. Oktober 1941 bereits im Laufen fast offen Juden aus dem Reichsgebiet, einschließlich Protektorat Böhmen und Mähren, nach dem Osten evakuiert werden. Ja. Diese Transporte, zumal nach Berlin, haben die Reichskanzlerin wie andere Dienststellen in wachsende Verlegenheit gemacht. Einerseits wurden an uns gewisse Gerüchte herangetragen über die besondere Behandlung der Evakuierten im Osten. Diese Gerüchte führten zu bisher 208 Selbstmorden unter den zum Abtransport bestimmten Juden. Andererseits waren betroffene Instanzen nicht in der Lage, angemessen zu reagieren bzw. Auskünfte zu erteilen. Vom Führer selbst unter den gegebenen Umständen keine Erklärung zu erhalten, noch zu erwarten. Wir leben in turbulenten Zeiten, Herr Minister, ja, Direktor. Aber die Tatsache, dass wir uns hier und heute getroffen haben, macht uns immerhin unser gutes Bild befunden. Was hat Sie denn mit ihm angestellt? Bei mir auf Erklärung gesetzt. Ja, alles klar hier. Zu den Berliner Juden. Wieso glauben die uns nicht, wenn wir ihnen sagen, ihr kommt beim Osten zum Arbeitseinsatz? Wissen die tatsächlich, was sie dort erwarten? Würden sie sonst aus dem Fenster springen oder den Gasmarkt sprengen? Ja, was haben dazu die Nachbarn, die Bekannten, die Freunde? Was für ein Gerede, um Gottes Willen. Ein Grund, wer die ganze Angelegenheit auf den Grund setzt. Das wäre zu wünschen. Die Juden selbst wollen in Berlin haben, aber uns im Auswärtigen Amt einen Kopfschmerz. Gut
Now listen to what they're going to do.
Zum Beispiel die Mitnahme von Juden mit ausländischen Pass. Das können wir uns nicht leisten. Überholt wird dann schwierig. Das sagen Sie meinem Botschafter. Wir werden das abstellen. Dann aber bitte auch, dass vereinzelt auch Judenmischlinge und solche aus Mischehen in die Aktionen mit einbezogen werden, wie es ja natürlicherweise geschehen ist. Was von Seiten des Innenministers sehr klar ist. Das sind Anlaufpannen, die selbstverständlich nicht vorkommen sollten, Kamerad Müller. Schon Vorsorge. Wenn wir schon dabei sind. Das kann ja heiter werden. Er reicht erstmal selbst in seiner Eigenschaft als Tierjagdmann moniert den Abzug auch von Rüstungsverarbeitern und lässt ausrichten, so habe man aber nicht gewettet. Also ich stelle fest, meine Herren, dass der Reichsmarschall in seiner einen Eigenschaft bedauert, was er in einer anderen bekommt. Sie sehen, meine Herren, die Probleme liegen nicht so einfach, besonders nicht den Kompetenzen kollidieren. Es ist deshalb von entscheidender Bedeutung, dass hier und jetzt Klarheit geschaffen wird über die Frage der Sicherheit. Ja, wir wissen doch, dass in unserem guten Berlin seit eh und je nicht schwieriger ist als eine Einigung über Zuständigkeit. Was wir hinter uns hier alle Leute darum reißen, unbedingt zuständig zu sein, was ja schließlich und endlich bedeutet, zuständig für mehr Arbeit. Also für unsere Tugend, Obergruppenführer. Geschenkt. Also, Scherz beiseite, meine Herren, der wäre kategorisch, steht auf die ausschließlich und unwiderruflich und ohne Abstriche beim Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler und Mittelvollmacht bei meiner bescheidenen Wenigkeit. Es liegt aber nichts Schriftliches vor. Von wem? Aus der Hand des Führers. Dass Maßnahmen von solcher Tragweite ohne vorherige Genehmigung zu treffen sein werden, das versteht sich davon selbst. Das Wort des Führers wiegt alles Papier auf. Im Übrigen, wenn Sie mir am Ende dieser Sitzung sonst jemand nennen können, der in der Lage ist, die vorhergesehene Lösung praktisch, betone praktisch durchzuführen und dazu noch in geordneter und anständiger Weise, dann wäre ich der Erste, der sagen würde, bitte, bitte nachgeben. Obergruppenführer, wir haben im Generalgouvernement 2,5 Millionen Juden. Ein erstrangiges und komplexes Problem mit dem als Problem. Werde ich den Generalgouverneur zu melden haben, dass man ihm auf diesen Sektor, wie er es ausdrücken würde, hineinzuvertieren? Aber wir werden auch nicht in Ihr Problem hineinbringen, Herr Staatssekretär. Wir werden es in der Vorhalte schaffen.
I'm just going to turn on the lights.
Wir werden Wohlgefallen auflösen und Sie werden es am Ende dafür nachfragen. Ihre Federführung gilt also für den gesamten Bereich der Zivilverwaltung im Osten. Richtig. Wobei allerdings sichergestellt werden muss, dass der Wille zur Zusammenarbeit gegenseitig ist.
I'm watching
Hören Sie noch zu, Herr Führer?
I'm watching the clock right now because I don't want to keep you here past quarter to 1. But I need to tell you that there's a critical part that you could watch on your own that's coming right now, in which they begin to discuss how to solve this problem, which is that they're going to start shuttling millions of people by train to death camps, essentially. And I don't want to end here because this is very dark, but I want to be able to help you to understand something about the paradox of progress. And I want to show you something now that's going to leave you with a nice balanced view of our future. What you're seeing now is what happens when humans don't understand that with the kinds of technologies, whether it's trains that can shuttle people, radio that can be used to transmit the speeches live of a tyrant, the gas and other materials that were used to kill people so quickly in the concentration camps. If we do not deal with our moral and ethical problems, then we're condemned to just create greater tragedies for humans with new tools of mass destruction. I have good news for you. Germany did not win the war. Hitler and those who supported him, particularly Hitler and his senior figures, they died in a bunker in Berlin when they were under great attack from the Allies, Britain, United States, and Canada. And after the Second World War, there was a great development for humanity in terms of even more human rights. The world created the first universal declaration of human rights through the United Nations. But I want to show you something even more encouraging about how we have been growing And this is one final short video. I'd like you to stay just for this, and then we will conclude. There is a scholar, his name is Hans Rosling. He's no longer with us, but his son is still carrying on the work of the father in Europe, who developed a system of gathering statistics and analyzing statistics that during the time when he was alive became quite influential. And his name is Hans Rosling. And he did a television series in England called The Joy of Stats, in which he analyzed statistics, hundreds of thousands of figures. And he's put together this remarkable, while he was alive, this short video where he analyzed data from the last 200 years of human history. And I want to show you something about the bigger forces in the human story that are even bigger in a way than what we saw in the Second World War with genocide and omnicide. And that is this human desire to keep getting better. The video is called The Joy of Stats, Hans Rosling's 200 Countries. Carol, could you put that in the live chat? Hans Rosling's 200 Countries, 200 Years, 4 Minutes, The Joy of Stats. There it is, the BBC. And this I want to leave you with, and then we'll conclude.
Visualization is right at the heart of my own work too. I teach global health. And I know having the data is not enough. I have to show it in ways people both enjoy and understand. Now, I'm going to try something I've never done before. Animating the data in real space with a bit of technical assistance from the crew. So, here we go. First, an active for health. Life expectancy from 25 years to 75 years. And down here, an active for wealth. Income per person. 400, 4,000, and 40,000 dollars. So down here is poor and sick, and up here is rich and healthy. Now, I'm going to show you the world 200 years ago, in 1810. Here come all the countries. Europe brown, Asia red, Middle East green, Africa south of Sahara blue, and the Americas yellow. And the size of the country bubbles show the size of the population. And in 1810, it was pretty crowded down there, wasn't it? All countries were sick and poor. Life expectancy were below 40 in all countries. And only the UK and the Netherlands were slightly better off, but not much. And now, why start the world? The Industrial Revolution makes countries in Europe and elsewhere move away from the rest. But the colonized countries in Asia and Africa, they are stuck down there. And eventually, the Western countries get healthier and healthier. And now we slow down to show the impact of the First World War and the Spanish flu epidemic. What a catastrophe. And now I speed up through the 1920s and the 1930s. And in spite of the Great Depression, Western countries forge on towards greater wealth and health. Japan and some others try to follow, but most countries stay down here. Now, after the tragedies of the Second World War, we stop a bit to look at the world in 1948. 1948 was a great year. The war was over, Sweden topped the medal table at the Winter Olympics, and I was born. But the differences between the countries of the world was wider than ever. The United States was in the front, Japan was catching up, Brazil was way behind, Iran was getting a little richer from oil, but still had short lives. And the Asian giants, China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Indonesia, they were still poor and sick down here. But look what is about to happen. Here we go again. In my lifetime, former colonies gained independence, and then finally they started to get healthier and healthier and healthier. And in the 1970s, then countries in Asia and Latin America started to catch up with the Western countries. They became the emerging economies. Some in Africa followed. Some Africans were stuck in civil war and others hit by HIV. And now we can see the world today in the most up-to-date statistics. Most people today live in the middle, but there are huge differences at the same time between the best of countries and the worst of countries. And and there are also huge inequalities within countries. These bubbles show country averages, but I can split them. Take China, I can split it into provinces. There goes Shanghai. It has the same wealth and health as Italy today. And there is the poor inland province Guizhou. It is like Pakistan. And if I split it further, the rural parts are like Ghana in Africa. And yet, despite the enormous disparities today, we have seen 200 years of remarkable progress. That huge historical gap between the West and the rest is now closing. We have become an entirely new converging world. And I see a clear trend into the future. With aid, trade, green technology, and peace, it's fully possible that everyone can make it to the healthy, wealthy corner. Well, what you have seen in the last few minutes is a story of 200 countries shown over 200 years and beyond. It involves plotting of 120,000 numbers. Pretty neat, huh?
So I'm going to let you go by just reminding you that evolution and change for the better is always possible. So I'm going to see you all next week, and maybe I'll be able to fill in a few more blanks for you around the story, but you've heard the essential points today. The paradox of progress, with a little bit of a slow sunrise happening, with things getting better and better. Slowly but surely. Have a great week, okay?
I
And
have a
you can always
question.
reach me via email. Take care.
Ron.
Thank you, Maya. Anything there? Oh, you did? Oh, already? Way to go. Okay. So we'll see you
Ron.
next week. Okay. Manta, go ahead. I see your hand.
was trying to talk to you, but you couldn't hear him.
Just a second. Yeah. Hold on. Sorry. Go ahead, Manta.
Ruzan had his mic on, and he was trying to talk to you.
Oh, okay. Ruzan wants to talk? Sure. Thanks. Ruzan, go ahead. Oh, no? Okay. Guess not.
You still there? He had a question, but
No, it was me.
oh,
Okay.
sorry, I had the wrong person. It was Ebenezer. Sorry.
Yeah, you said you were going to mark assignment 2 last week.
Sorry, say that again, Ruzan?
No, you said you were going to mark assignment 2 last week.
Yes. Yes, I'm good. Oh, that's I'm going to be I'm a little backed up right now. Sorry, but I'm working on them. So no, yeah, that's all. So I probably haven't marked if you don't have anything back yet, it's because I haven't marked it. I'm working on it. And this weekend. Yeah, sorry. I'm just backed up.
No problem. Thanks.
Yep. Okay. So anything else? I see Roseanne there, Carol, of course. Manta, anything you'd like to say before I sign off from here?
I think I got everything I need. I will see
Okay.
you next week.
Okay. And take care.
Bye now.
Bye. Okay.